I am Jarrett.
And I'm Mark.
And this is the Podcast. The podcast about a podcast. And today we're here to talk about something very special. Insulting, would you like to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So Exalted is a game that's somewhat popular, and unfortunately it has kind of lost a lot of faith from its fandom. But maybe it could be slowly creeping it back in. Exalted came about in the very, very early 2000s as kind of an alternative to Dungeons & Dragons, as a World of Darkness before it was World of Darkness. It's kind of become its own thing since then, which is good, because the whole First City thing was a neat idea, but it really kind of did an injustice to have to slot everything into these things are going to be werewolves someday, and these are the mages. It didn't really work. But it was fun, kind of. We made the best of it. How about you guys?
Well, personally for me, I got into Exalted as an actual system fairly recently. I have fairly limited experience. As always, as with a lot of things, something you're going to find on this podcast, Insulting's probably going to be the one that knows the most about the history, has probably played all of the games. Me and Ark, we are probably going to be more inexperienced. A lot of us we have the perspective of a new player.
Yeah, we're coming from it and a new perspective.
Yeah, because I just earlier this year I read the Exalted 3rd edition book for the first time. Yeah, to me, Exalted is very interesting, because it's a game that is kind of its own thing. It runs separate from a lot of game industry trends. It also runs directly into a lot of game industry trends at different places. It's a unique game. Generally, I think a good idea, first of all, should be to actually do an episode, and that's what we're doing right now, about what Exalted actually is. I think that Insulting, you could give a good brief description of the general concept of Exalted.
Oh, I absolutely cannot. It is so big.
Okay.
but I could try. So Exalted it's an alternate world, very much a stylized version of what we would see as cities that have regions have a very definite theme to them. There's not India, there's not Italy, there's not Japan, but a lot of those themes are written in kind of a general enough way to not just be those places. There's just been so much work put into writing about what the cultures are like, what the people are like, traditions, holidays. Exalted has its own calendar, where it's a 15-month calendar. Each month has 28 days, and then each season has 3 months in it. And then there's 5 extra days that are called calibration, where the sun stops rising for 5 days. There's a god named 5 Days Darkness who's attached to those 5 days, but the calendar gods won't let that be part of the calendar. And that's a thing. There's heaven as a place that you can go to, and it's a giant continent-sized place that's just like a 3-dimensional city with streets paved with gold, and the sun is right there. You can go to it if you want to, and depending on how you want it to be, you can have also in just the world, the sun just be a thing. At one point, the sun and the moon were written as a giant battle cruiser and a big flying sickle, respectively, and things got a little crazy. And then 3rd edition finally came along, and it's been a slow trickle, but they really did away with a lot of the more nuanced themes.
Yeah, I have to say, heaven and stuff in Exalted is so good.
Oh yeah, that's one of the cooler parts of the setting, is the heavenly bureaucracy and all that stuff. But something I think we should probably do, for those of you listeners who have never even heard about Exalted, or have heard about it in a very limited sense, I think we should talk about what the RPG actually is.
Sure.
It is functionally a game about playing great epic heroes. A game about playing people like Gilgamesh, people like Sun Wukong, people like Moses, people like Samson the Strong, like mythical figures of immense power and fame, like proto-heroes, the children of God. In the game, you play as what's called an Exalted, which basically, to cut a very long story short, a bunch of the gods basically cut out pieces of themselves and made it so that humans can take up those pieces. So, for example, you could be a solar. You could be a chosen of the sun, someone who is the embodiment of human perfection in one way, of skill, of exceptionalism. Or you could be a lunar and be someone who's been empowered by the god of the moon. Or be someone who's empowered by the gods of the stars and of
You
fate.
can be many things.
Yeah, you can be a lot. And the thing that kind of connects all of this is you kind of start at a base level in Exalted as a max level D&D character. Your beginning is where most stories end. You are tremendously powerful to a almost absurd degree as an Exalted. It's a game about playing someone who is quite literally exalted.
Yeah. You're not exactly a god.
Yeah, you're not a god per se, but you're divine in a way. You're celestial.
You get your powers from a god.
Yeah. All of the Exalted get their powers from what's called an exaltation spark. This little piece of energy that binds itself to your soul and makes you an Exalted. It's like, and there's like qualifications. So like, a solar has to try to do something crazy and like hard and succeed. So like, a soldier might be fighting a battle with multiple enemies, and because he's fighting with such skill and precision, exalts mid-combat. You have to be doing something to be worthy of the exaltation normally.
You can't just be like at home and then one day just exalt because of the fun of it.
Yeah. Now there are exceptions, and we'll get into those eventually when we talk about the Dragon-Blooded. But in general, it's a story about playing epic heroes.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that, Insuling?
You guys actually did a pretty good job of covering it. So you have different Exalted types, different types of Chosen, and it's separated into the Solar Exalted, which are presumably chosen either by the sun or are at least the champions of the sun, who is a character in the game named the Unconquered Sun. There's the Lunar Exalted, which are a sadly maligned group of heroes that the writers can't seem to find a good spot for, but they're the chosen they're the champions of the moon. And then you have the Sidereals, who are seers, and they are the chosen of the stars. And then you have the Abyssal Exalted, which are kind of like the champions of the dead. And then you have the Infernal Exalted, and they're the chosen champions of the things that came before, the things that the Primordials turned into, known as the Yozi. And then you have the Alchemical Exalted, which have a lot of themes based on like men being made out of clay into champions for the people. And they all have their own things. They all have their own themes. They all do a good job of really being their own thing. I also forgot my favorite ones, the Dragon-Blooded, or the Terrestrial Exalted. They're kind of the chosen of the earth, and they have more literal themes of kind of more like the Eastern elements of the fire, water, air, earth, and wood. And together they can build a really cool cast of heroes, especially if you are willing to read the book and see what it's all about, but then really make it your own. Don't do something because the book tells you that that's what that Exalted type likes to do. Just do your own thing. Have fun with it. You're Gilgamesh. Don't have a boss. Nobody likes bosses. To be fair, I like my boss. She's pretty great.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Solar Exalted, the Lunar Exalted, all of these different types, they all add a certain flavor and a certain interpretation of the idea of being better. Like, okay, every Exalted has sort of a gimmick, like sort of a thing that they focus on. The Solar Exalted, they focus on being really good at human things. Like, the Solar Exalted can't necessarily wave his hands around and cause a tentacle sword to come out and stab you. But a Solar Exalted can punch a tree and turn the tree into a house, because he punched it so hard and with such perfect skill that it forced the tree to shape itself into a house.
Yeah, that same Solar could punch a house and turn it into planks of wood. It's pretty intense.
It's, you basically pick any skill a human can do right now and think about what would a super god do with that skill. Take for example, perfect example, diplomacy. A human diplomat, what is the most crazy thing a human diplomat can do? Now turn it up to 30, and that's what an Exalted who specializes in being an Exalted Solar who specializes in being a diplomat can do. You can just like basically break the world with your skill. A craftsman can create magical objects that are so powerful, like looping back around, perfect example, there was a craftsman character in Princes of the Universe, and she just made like a super advanced city that was powered by sun energy and completely broke the setting in half, because that's just what a Solar does. They're like a hammer. But every other Exalted type also has a gimmick. Like the Lunar Exalted, they're all about being shapeshifters.
Transforming.
They're about transformation and animals and nature. So they have powers associated with that. Now, we'll get into each Exalt type and what we like and don't like later, but every type has something cool about it. Like, okay, Sidereals. They can just mess with fate. Like, they have a power where they can take a ribbon, wrap it around a city, and then wrap the ribbon around their waist and just drag a city across the world and just plop it down somewhere, and no one ever realizes that they were ever anywhere else. They just don't remember ever not being at the new location.
Like, when you're starting to play Exalted, there's different there's different Exalted that are perfect for the job. Like, if you want to be the best fighter in the battlefield, you pick the Solar.
Yeah, so those are generally what's called the Celestial Exalted. Your Lunars, your Solars, and your
and then you have the Terrestrial Exalted.
Yeah, you all now mind. There's also other stuff like the Abyssals, who are they're sort of the anti-Exalted. Like, I mean, they're the anti-Solar. Like the Abyssals are sort of
like in a way.
They have similar powers, but with a twist to them. Like in Soling, if you could explain the Abyssals, I have a hard time putting it to words.
All right. Well, so the book describes Abyssals as stolen, what's called shards of from the Solars that were captured and somehow turned evil and then released by the Death Lords to go out and be villains, but they have the potential to be so much more than that. They're the heroes of those who can't speak for themselves. They're the heroes of the dead. They protect the underworld from encroachment from the wild and from other monstrosities. They have so much of their own stuff going on, and I will drop a con on the setting because of this, because it's just such a dropping of the ball, because Abyssals have so much that they could do, but the writers got so distracted by making the bad guys that they didn't realize how cool it would be to just be a champion of the dead. You know, you show up when the dead are mistreated and you stop that because hungry ghosts are a thing. Hungry ghosts are a problem for everybody. Nobody wants to deal with that. Stop being mean to the dead. Give them their respect.
Yeah, just because you're the ruler of the underworld doesn't mean you're the bad guy. Just because you can control death doesn't mean you're the big bad evil guy.
Yeah, another thing. This is something that this is something that people need to figure out very quickly about Exalted. Your exaltation doesn't make you good or bad. This is very important. Very important. You can be a Solar and be a complete monster who needs to be killed, and you can be an Abyssal and be a good person. Like morality and the exaltation, they aren't necessarily connected. You can be evil and be a Solar. You can be good and be a So the Solars and the Lunars, even if they might have an outwardly dark or light appearance, don't mistake that for them being set as the good or bad guys, because the whole point of Exalted is it's kind of up to you. It's what you're going to do with that power. And
what about the dragon-blooded, Jerry?
The dragon-blooded did nothing wrong. And there go all of our Exalted listeners.
Out the window.
Yeah, jumped straight out the window.
So for the rest of you who don't understand what that means, hello, welcome. There's still hope for you.
Yeah, but that's the thing. No one's good or bad based upon what exaltation they get that I can tell. I'm not fully familiar with the Infernals, so I don't know what their thing
From
is.
as far as I'm reading it, it's like you pick your Exalted type to match like what you want to specify in, rather than like, oh well, you're an abyssal, that means you're evil, or that means you have to be dark and edgy.
Yeah, it's like
a solar doesn't mean that you have to be chaotic good.
Yeah, you can just be whatever you want your character to be, and the world, like just being one splat or another isn't going to make your character good or bad.
Just watch Princes of the Universe.
Oh god. Yeah. You want to quash the idea that solars are just naturally good? Watch Princes of the Universe, because every single person in that is by design horrible, and they're all solar. Like they are the most like in any other game, in any other campaign, they would be the group that you go and kill as the villains. Like, oh god, they're unethical. Like, they're not evil, but they're just completely self-centered and completely dedicated to avoiding consequences.
Yeah.
It's perfect. But yeah, so
if somebody says that type of Exalted means basically alignment, show them Princes of the Universe sponsored by nobody.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a good example of what Exalted can be. And like they really do take the system out for a run. The only place they don't really venture to is the West, and I think I think they briefly go to the Far East, but that's the first episode, and we'll get to that.
We'll be making a Princes of the Universe recap soon.
Yeah, so we'll work with we'll put that one in a pen. We'll put a pen in it, and we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Exalted. There's also Dragon Blooded. Their whole thing is they're the weakest type of Exalt. There's a lot of them. See, the thing is basically the elemental dragons, the gods that made the gods that made the Dragon-Blooded, instead of making it so like, oh, there's 100 sparks, and those sparks are eternal, and they're never going to fade, and there's always going to be 100 Exalted of this type, they instead decided to basically make it a bloodline, so you can make tons of Dragon-Blooded Exalted, but they're all individually a bit weaker than, say, a solar. Like, a Dragon-Blooded is just a bit less powerful than the other Exalt types.
If you viewers have ever read about Godbound, it's like comparing a regular Godbound to a Scion.
Yeah, or to use a more common thing, if anyone has watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, that's what elemental Scion are. Mm-hmm. They are the different bender types.
Pretty much.
Like, you might be a Dragon-Blooded of fire, and so you'll have fire powers, but it won't just be you throw fireballs. It'll be like giving a rousing speech that pushes people towards a bit more of a fiery aggression. Yeah, like it does. Like the powers manifest as skills, so like you can add in like air. So you could weave air elemental energy into a spell and use magic with air, like.
There's also wood.
Yeah, there's wood. Mm-hmm. Wood. By the way, there's 5 elements in for Dragon-Blooded. There's fire, water, earth, air, wood, and wood basically represents life and nature.
And an important thing to note about Exalted is that you have sorcery and then you have charms, and they're all magic. Like all of it is magic. It's fine. You know, like in a lot of games you have like, I'm the fighter, I don't have spells. Well, in Exalted you do. If you're a fighter and you're swinging your sword and you're using charms on your weapon, you're using spells. It's all innate. It's all stuff that your character is just intuitively does. And so the charms are basically both kind of in-game, but it's also understood that a lot of it is like kind of like just accepted as nature. Like you just can do that when you block an impossible to block blow, it's because you just did it. It's not because you used this charm.
Yeah, the charms themselves are narratively driven rather than actual things in the setting. Like, no one's gonna say, "Oh, I activated Dipping Swallow Defense to dodge that." That's not a thing in setting. It's a thing that we outside of setting use to refer to the power.
And it doesn't matter what Exalt type you choose, you'll have access to charms, and boy, there are a lot of them.
Oh God, there's if any of you are worried that, oh wow, there might not be enough charms to, don't worry about that. There's oh Lord, if you want charms, by God, you're gonna get charms.
So 3rd edition made the mistake of just kind of not combing through the charms that they had and figuring out which ones they could probably just combine into a single thing. So they ended up coming out with a book. Do you guys know how many pages that book is?
Probably, like, I think it's 500 something. Check, actually.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I have the book as well. Oh, there's 686 pages, including the covers.
There is a massive number of charms, and the book itself reads something like a Bible.
Yeah.
Except for any Bible from any religion is probably going, like, anything except for Judaism is probably going to be an easier Bible to read through than the Exalted 3E guide, because it is a dense tome.
Lord.
That's not just a thing. I've actually said before that I've read one of the versions of the Christian Bible 3 times, cover to cover, including the boring parts, skipping a couple of New Testament chapters because it's kind of the same thing. Sue me, I don't care. Come at me, bro. But I cannot get all the way through the charms in Exalted 3rd edition. I just couldn't do it. It was too much. It's just so dry, and it's all of it is just stuff of, like, it's incremental changes, it's little incremental things of, like, if your opponent rolls 1s, those subtract from their successes. Okay, why does that have to be a separate charm from this other one that gives you another similar bonus? Just combine them to make them one thing. Come on.
So when Exalted first came out, the 1st edition was, I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it was also, like, it was a 1st edition. Like, there was, you could see the potential of the game as a whole, but you could also tell, like, it's a 2000s era RPG from White Wolf. Like, there's going to be some stuff that you notice. There's going to be design decisions that are weird. There's going to be a lot of, like, weird balancing because no one had ever tried this. Like, this was kind of new to people. So it was rough, and it, again, I do think it gets a bit of a pass because it was the 1st attempt.
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can ask for a 1st attempt like that. Like, it worked, kind of. And that's impressive just for how broad Exalted is. So, moving on, 2nd edition. Okay. So, how do I describe 2nd edition? How do we put 2nd edition into words?
A beautiful train wreck.
Yeah, a beautiful train wreck. It didn't know what it wanted to be by the people who made it, and then they just, like, basically threw it to the freelancers. That's one book. I don't remember. Was it the Abyssals or the Infernals book? The one where the first half is horrifying and the second half, the charm part, is okay?
Oh, it was definitely in the Infernals. The Infernals had the problem where the writers didn't understand that they wanted the Abyssal, or they wanted the Infernal Exalted to kind of be like anti-heroes, kind of like rock stars gone amok. It was supposed to be people who were failing in life or in a moment, and then, like, in a moment of weakness, some demon would arrive and say, hey, do you want power? And if they said no, then the person would just be left to die. And if they said yes, then they'd get a bunch of power, and they would be blessed by the Yozi. But then the Yozi were kind of bad at, at doing much of anything, because the Yozi are lobotomized primordials. And so you kind of have a free ride as an Infernal. You can really just kind of do whatever you want. But then another writer heard that and said, okay, I'm going to make horrible torture porn, and that's going to be like the first 3 chapters of this book, including comics at the beginning of every chapter, just to really drive that point home. I'd rather not get into it right now, but
we'll have a separate thing on some interesting parts of Exalted, as I like to put it. But to put it simply, there was horrible editing and overall, two people wrote that book. Or not 2 people, but 2 separate entities wrote that book.
It was
and
terrible.
The writers on one side didn't interact at all with the writers on the other, and it just kind of came together. And it was just 2E is the perfect example of how not to publish a game series, how not to handle it.
I heard somebody saying "Oh, it was just because of terrible miscommunication." It was because of no communication.
Yeah,
any self-respecting editor would have just taken a look at that. At the first comic in that book and said, what did you just hand me? We're not publishing this. Throw this in the garbage, reread what we told you to do, and do your job, or else we'll find another writer who will, and they'll probably do it for free. We'll just promise them exposure.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that too, by the way.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that they also did. But so I cannot stress enough, we're eventually going to talk about Infernals, and I love the idea of Infernals, but I don't want somebody to go to the 2nd edition book, open it up, and think that we're a bunch of weirdos. That book was a moral event. That book was a moral event horizon as far as Exalted, and a lot of people just stopped playing altogether because of that. They said, "Oh, these are the people whose game that who we're giving money to." No, I'm not. I can't.
Yeah, exactly. So then, after 2nd edition, they did a Kickstarter for 3rd edition, the edition we now have in our hands, and it was a success. Exalted has a niche but hyper dedicated fan base who, they funded it. They really funded it. And it was written, and Exalted, it fixes some of 2nd edition. It goes over a lot of the weird stuff. It has a cohesive design, so it fixes some of the crazy too many cooks for the pot thing that happened with 2E. It has really weird art. That's
I like
something.
The art.
I gotta say this myself. I was expecting anime art and weeb trash art, which I was hoping for. I was disappointed. It was very vanilla fantasy art, which is weird for a setting as Gonzo's as Exalted. So
I personally enjoy the art.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad. It just doesn't really quite convey the idea of it, because you're looking at the art and going, okay, that's cool, but what do I do with this game? Everybody who's making a game, pay attention to Ark and what he's saying.
Art in video games, any specific medium, is one of the main reasons why people play something. If I look at a cover of a book and I see something that is so cool, and just role-playing game art is so important that a lot of people look over it, even though it's one of the main key aspects to selling a game and making it look exactly what Jarrett said. Sure, Exalted art, but it didn't capture the feeling of what Exalted is.
Very well put.
Yeah.
Very well put. And Exalted is an anime. It is designed explicitly for doing that thing they do in Dragon Ball where 2 characters start punching at each other with really tiny punches and just go da 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 da, and then just do that. It's designed explicitly to do that. It is an anime.
It is Dragon Ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It is expressly designed to do that.
It even has.
And so it's weird. The art is so not that.
It's like they were trying to lean away from it, and I just have to say, if you're a gamer and you don't like anime, that's actually fine. I get it. It's okay. You don't have to like anime. Don't look at cool stuff and say, oh well, I don't think your character should do that because that's kind of anime. Anyways, let my wizard go. I'm gonna summon a rhino and I'm gonna cast a fly spell on it, and then I'm gonna launch a quicken fireball into you guys. Okay, well, your wizard is anime. I hate to say it, but Merlin didn't do that. So that's anime, my dude. Love it. Just embrace it. It's fine. Anime is awesome. But you don't have I don't know. I don't even know.
Very well put in Sullen. it fits in kind of like and you'll once we get to talking about third edition and Pathfinder, we'll talk about this. But one of the things with a lot of systems and with a lot of the way people view RPGs, they're very uncomfortable with the idea of characters who aren't explicitly wizards doing things that are magical or doing things that have magical tier effects. Like, it's totally okay for the wizard to fly, but if you let the fighter jump high enough to functionally replicate flight, people are going to get uncomfortable with it because they don't really want the fighter doing that because it reminds them of anime, and people have a weird it's like the Tome of Weeaboo Fighting Magic, that book.
I love that
everyone
book.
Calls that. It fixes it. It makes martial characters not horrible. But no one likes it because for some reason, despite this being a hobby of super nerds who throw fireballs at people, like, that's kind of the whole thing, like, really nerdy niche stuff, for some reason there's this weird hatred of martial characters being fun. Exalted, I will have to say this, kind of doesn't do that. In Exalted, wizards are still terrifying because they have, like, the ability to, like, do sorceress workings and stuff. But in Exalted, if you run up against someone who's, like, focused in beating you to death with his bare hands, by God, you should be afraid, because he can do that.
Yeah.
He will beat you to death, and he will punch you through a mountain. He will tear down the mountain to fight you.
Because that is what he is good at.
Yeah, like, Exalted, I'll give it this. I have many criticisms of the system, but I have to say, Exalted, they will break the world to let people be cool. And
it's the rule of cool.
Yeah, and it actually lets, like, the martial character can actually just break things apart and not care, because he's invested his entire character into destroying things, so he does that better than anyone else. And that is one of my biggest praises I gotta give for Exalted. It completely does away with caster supremacy.
Yeah, definitely. There is no class in between what's called the splats, which is the name given to, like, are you a solar, are you an abyssal? If you're a solar, you have access to all of the solar charms. You just have to meet the minimum ability and essence ratings for those charms. And different Exalt types have different requirements, like Lunars use attributes instead of abilities and whatnot, but, like, it's great because you can be a fight dude who also can talk to ghosts and make yourself able to go swimming in a volcano if you feel like it. Like, anybody can kind of do anything if you just focus on it.
And there's places where that cracks a little bit. Like, if you want to be a crafter, you're not doing anything else. You're just going to be the crafter. There's that's kind of like, the system has kind of weird kinks, but in general, as a whole, it actually it solves the problem of wizards being the best by making everyone basically a wizard.
Why is the wizard better at fighting than me, or, like, better at, like, hand-to-hand combat than me?
Yeah, because the wizard can just summon a monster that can beat you in direct combat. Do you know that's a thing in certain editions of D&D? There's builds for wizards that let them summon things that can beat a comparative level fighter.
Oh yeah, I've played that. I've played that wizard. It was great. I rolled a critical hit with a charging rhino against a guy, and did, like, ×4 damage. It was amazing.
And that's one of the things that, like, Exalted excels at, is if you want to play a story about a character who isn't a wizard, who still kicks people's teeth in, it's great for that.
Yeah.
However, if you do want to play a wizard, you can do that, but the system is designed so that it pushes you a bit more towards being a Gandalf type guy. Like, if you're a wizard, your magic's going to be a bit more abstract than it is in D&D. It's less fireball, more Gandalf. It's a bit more, like, thematically old school in that sense, or thematically, like, Tolkien-esque. Or like what sorcerers could do in Chinese mythology and stuff. Like, so, like, you aren't going to be casting magic missile, but you are going to take you places. Like, it's a bit of a difference in, like, Gandalf summoning those eagles versus delayed blast fireball. So yeah, like, you can still be a wizard, by the way. Like, that's just something I want to make sure that, like, viewers understand. You can still totally be a dude who does magic, but then, like, D&D magic.
You can try to make a D&D character, but I don't know. It's more fun to just say, like, what do you want to be excited about? Somebody else saying, hey, we need somebody to do this. Do that. Be good at that. Like, if you want to be excited, everybody says, oh darn, a locked door. Play a nightcast or have larceny charms and be able to deal with locked doors. If you want to say, oh goody, whenever somebody says, help, I need a punch dude, play a punch dude. Pick a job and try to be good at it. That's usually how I try to make an Exalted character. And I actually took that into other games too, where I just said, like, before I try to figure out who my character is and what my stats are, I try to look at the game and say, what do I want to do? What is my character's place in this world? And it just happens that Exalted is neat because that place can be so many things. Like, you could start a character as kind of like a god king of a region if you hyper focus on it, and that's what your character does. And boy howdy are you good at it.
It's really fun, it's really cool. Like, the parts of Exalted that are good are great. That's the thing. Exalted's kind of an all or nothing game. The parts that are good are fantastic. The parts that are bad are creatively bad, to put it
which we will get into in later episodes.
Like, Exalted has some pretty big core issues, and I don't know how much we should get into it here. There's just some baseline, like, how the mechanics work issues with the system.
Yeah.
But that really, like, in the sense of the game itself as an entire experience, it actually matters quite a bit less than you would think, because it's more about, like, the idea of Exalted than anything else. It's about, like, all of the fun stuff you can do working in that framework.
I have a question for you guys. Why do you enjoy playing Exalted, and what makes it different from other systems, do you think?
Okay.
Like, why should somebody spend their money on Exalted 3rd Edition or other editions, rather than just buying, like, other games?
Okay, I get that question. Personally, I would say the reason why the idea of Exalted is worth something is because it captures a very unique tone and a very unique, like, feeling that you really don't get from other systems. Even if I don't necessarily like Exalted 3E as a system, I like the vibe it gives, if that makes sense.
I get it.
It's like, I like Exalted as all of the little parts. Like, I love reading about the different types of Exalted and the characters, and I love certain places in the setting, and I think that it all fits together in a nice way. I have other issues, but I would say that that's my rough opinion.
Inslee?
Well, Exalted is just a big setting, and it's just begging to be played with, and you can do so much with it. Like, you could be on the Blessed Isle, which is this Asia-sized continent in the middle of the world that's surrounded by the sea, and it has 5 growing seasons. It has all this culture and vibrant places where you could have entire stories and just lose yourself in it and never go out to the outside. You could never leave the Blessed Isle. You can play in any of the directions, and all of the directions have their own themes. The south is themed to fire, and as you go farther south, it becomes more dry, more desert. The west is themed to water and has very little land. If you plan on playing in the west, I definitely recommend taking a green marker and just stippling a bunch of little islands into the giant ocean that's there. It makes it rad, but it's just water. And eventually, when you sail out west, or when you sail west far enough, the ocean stops being salty, because the salt is just part of the other poles interacting with the water. In the north, you have air, which gets colder and colder the farther you go. But it's the source of purity, the source of breathable air that flows in from the pole of air. And a lot of people mistake air as being the source of cold, but really it's just the absence of heat. It is the farthest place from the pole of fire, which is the source of all warmth in the world. Then you go east, and you have the pole of wood, which is a source of life and vibrancy, and eventually the trees become the size of cities, and you can just become lost in there. And there's those places, and then all places in between, where things get more and more tame as you go further in towards the inland sea, which surrounds the Blessed Isle. You even have an adventurer town called Nexus, that some people like to go and spend their entire gaming session, or their entire game there, because it's adventurer town. It even has a bunch of just inbuilt little places to go. They definitely visit that in Princes of the Universe, and it's pretty great. No spoilers.
It's the best.
So there's there's just so much to do in Exalted. So anytime that somebody says, "Hey, I would love to run a game and maybe put it into the Exalted setting," I jump on it, like no hesitation. I just like, yes, please. I want to play in this world. I just want to play in the sandbox. I want to run in the sandbox. There's so much here, and I just want to get into it.
That's the coolest thing about Exalted is its breadth. There is mountains upon mountains upon mountains of just stories and potential.
There's so much diversity in the setting itself. There's Asiatic themes, there's sea themes, and it's enough to where it's really like a system for all of your needs, really. And that's what I really love about Exalted. Is most of the stuff that I love about Exalted are Exalt types and the setting itself. Like, I love the West. I love the Blessed Isles, and you can, like you said, you can kind of just lose yourself in how much lore they made with it.
Yeah.
That's the main reason why I love Exalted.
So
yeah, that's very well put.
So I want to look at the writers for Exalted for a moment, and say, like, we're gonna tear this game apart. It's gonna happen. We're gonna spend at least 2 episodes kind of being down on this game, also being down on the company that has yet to pay you guys and gals. Like, very talented men and women wrote for this game, and they do deserve credit where credit is due. But we're going to tear apart your, like, large aspects of your writing, and I'm sorry, I really am, because we love this game, but this is one of those games where, like we said in our pilot episode, if we tear it apart, it's because we love it, and just somehow it missed the mark. It did something wrong, and we want to figure out what we can do to make it better.
I love Exalted, and the fact that I love it is also why I kind of hate it.
We only do this because we love you.
Yeah, like, it's literally like that. Like, if I didn't care about Exalted, I simply would have never done a podcast at all.
We're not mad, we're just disappointed.
That's the best way to put that, yes. Like, we see all of the cool things that Exalted can be when it's done right. It's a disappointing thing when it's not done right, because we see talent in the writers and talent in the people making it, and
especially for people just getting into it.
Yeah, like, there's like a glut of material you could possibly want Exalted related. Like, there are entire books. There isn't like a big Exalted setting book. No. You get a book just for one direction. It's such a vast setting that you couldn't really detail all of Exalted in one book that wasn't a 600-page plus, like, epic tome.
Yeah. Like, just to show how
that big of a set.
Just to show how big this is. This is supposed to be our basic overview, and we're just already getting into the weeds about Exalted. It's just so big. We're going to be at this for a while, but, well, don't worry. We'll probably break it up with other stuff.
Yeah, we aren't just going to be beating you over the head with Exalted content, so don't you guys worry about that. We're probably soon going to do an episode on maybe Godbound, or we might do an episode on...
There'll be different episodes about different systems, but since there's so much about Exalted, that there's going to be so many videos about us talking about it and the different parts of the world.
Like, this, talking about Exalted, is going to take more than one video. We aren't going to be able to talk about everything we want to talk about right now, because it would take us an entire night, 9 hours. It would take... Our computers would explode just from the amount of data we would have to send to each other to edit it. It would be a nightmare. Which is why we're breaking it up into chunks.
Yeah.
I have a very limited understanding of the backstory, and as someone who is almost as ignorant as someone who's never read the setting, I'm going to briefly explain the creation story of Exalted. Way back before anything existed, there was basically two things. There were these guys called the Primordials, who were super double gods. They were gods before gods. They're like the primordial entities, basically. And then there was Essence. So these two things. Or maybe the Primordials were partially Essence. It's kind of vague, because prehistory. Okay, so they're like, this is boring. I want something to exist so we can, like, have squirrels and shit. So they go, okay, let's make reality. And so they make the world. They make the 5 directions. They make, like, the poles. They make people. And people act as, like, a power source and entertainment and stuff. And they also go, okay, I don't want to have to maintain this. I know. Let's make gods so they can maintain the universe for us. So they make, like, the god of perfection, the unconquered sun, the god of trees, the god of ducks, the god of the 5 days between the calendar during calibration. They make every single god all for purpose-built things, and basically they create the world, and then they go off to do something called the Games of Divinity. Now, the thing is, the Games of Divinity is kind of like... Well, a polite way to put it. It's... No one knows what it is. It's a really cool game that all of the gods are addicted to the point of, like, not caring about the outside world. Like, it is a hyper-addictive game that is kind of left vague because no description would ever work because, you know, humans. But, so they all go off to play the Games of Divinity, and it leaves the gods here on Earth. Humans aren't too happy with this either, by the way, because the Primordials were not nice to people. They were, politely stated, they were kind of dicks. So basically the Unconquered Sun and a bunch of other gods basically go, you know, this is shitty. I want to play the Games of Divinity. I don't want to be constantly being conquered by some asshole. And I really wish I could screw up everything. And then basically one of the Primordials, Autocathon, basically went, oh, hey kids, I heard you wanted to ruin everything. Let me help. And he helped with the God of Perfection, the Unconquered Sun, to make the first Exalts. And basically, the way it worked is, the Unconquered Sun took a piece of himself, a piece of his own power, and ripped it out. And then took that power and gave it to mortals. Because here's the thing. The gods, you would think, wow, the God of Perfection, why doesn't he walk up to the Primordials and shove his fist through their face? Well, you see, the Primordials are actually pretty clever. They figured, you know, the gods are going to kick our teeth in if they get the chance. Let's just make them so they can't directly hurt us. And so they did. And so gods can never directly harm Primordials. However, the Primordials were also kind of vain, and they went, humans will never hurt us. Let's waste our energy making them immune. So humans could just punch Primordials in the mouth. Oh, so the gods gave humans power. They gave them the power to break everything. And so a bunch of Solars, newly born Solars, started making war with the Primordials. And a bunch of other gods also started making Exalts. So, like, the Moon God made the Lunars. The 5 Maidens, the 5 gods of fate and the stars, made the Sidereals. The elemental spirits, the elemental dragons, they made the Dragon-Blooded. And they all go to war. Now, by all accounts, killing the Primordials is an actual impossible thing. It can't be done. Godbound don't care about what's impossible. Not Godbound.
You did it.
Yeah, I did it. I've been trying to not say it. Okay. Exalted don't care about what's possible. So they killed them anyways. This had a knock-on effect. Short term, the gods went, okay, we're going to go to heaven. Hey, you, Solars, you guys are in charge. You guys go do that. I'm going to go and play the games of divinity, because that's cool. See you guys never. And so he goes up to heaven, and he's kind of been there ever since. So the primordials were pissed. Because, see, the primordials were kind of dead, but they couldn't die because they weren't created to die. So they sort of became half-dead, lobotomized things called the Yozi. They're like, they aren't supposed to be. They're broken, and they're defeated. They lost, but they're also, they can't end, because you really can't die if you were never alive. They weren't built to die, but they were killed. So they're sort of stuck in limbo, sort of, in a weird way. Mm-hmm. And they were also really pissed at everyone who killed them. So they went, you know what? I'm going to curse all of you assholes. And so they created something called the Great Curse, which in story things basically means that all of the various Exalted have sort of like these ticks about them. They all have a touch of corruption to go evil over time. Like, for example, they all become more flawed as time passes. Now, in-game, this is represented by a limit break mechanic that causes you to, once you do enough things that irritate your character, it causes him to throw a bit of a temper tantrum. Mm-hmm.
Which is a really cool
yeah, it's pretty cool. But out of story, it's like basically like the Solars had unlimited power, an entire planet all their own, and they were in charge. And they had a curse that the longer they were alive, the more corrupt they would become, the more flawed they would become. Boy, did they. So basically, you know the situation that happened last time with the Primordials? The same thing happened again, but this time it was the Sidereals and the Dragon-Blooded who were pissed. The Sidereals basically went, okay, we totally see what's about to happen because we're fate guys. So we got two options. We can either blow everything up and kill all the Solars and capture them and put them in a cage and basically like make a world without the Solars and work from there. Or we can try and fix the Solars. Well, they decided to go with Plan A. They tricked they didn't trick. They convinced the Dragon-Blooded to overthrow the Solars. They got all the Solars in one place, or most of the Solars in one place, killed them all Red Wedding style, and then the Sidereals erased themselves from human understanding and history altogether, so no one remembers that they ever existed. And then the Dragon-Blooded became the only ones to take control. And that creates the current age, the current world. The Dragon-Blooded are in power. They absolutely hate both Lunars and Solars. Basically, they're the ones in charge, and not all of them even remember that any of this happened. It's a lot of lost history, and guess what? They're all in charge, and now they're slowly becoming more corrupt, just like what happened the last two times, because there's kind of like an ongoing theme in Exalted that once one group gets massive amounts of power, they turn into assholes, because that's what happens when one group has massive amounts of power with no checks and balances. And so that happens again. But hey, so at least there's no one that could possibly interfere with their power structure, no Solars. It's not like someone let them out or something, because you see, there are these guys who were kind of the rulers of the dead, and they kind of took a gander at all those Solars in a cage, and they went, I want that. And so they reached into the cage and got a bunch of Solar exaltations and turned them into evil exaltations. Like, not evil in the moral sense, but like, ooh, I've corrupted the Solar power into being an abyssal or an infernal. Oh, I'm spooky. And so they did that. It was great, and everyone loved it. And it also had the side effect of releasing the Solars. So all of a sudden, after like thousands of years of the Solars not existing, they're just all back. And they just kind of slam into the setting head first, because they're ancient Gilgamesh-style heroes that break the power cap and they're just insane and powerful. And they're also all flawed on a very core level, because the Great Curse is still a thing. Oh god, the setting is not ready for this. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that's the current day. A lot of people are pretty pissed the Solars are back. A lot of people are pretty happy. All around, things are doing pretty bad, but also things have been better too. So, creation is basically going down the shitter by the day, and only you, the Solars or the Lunars or whichever you decide to play, will be the people capable of fixing it.
We're in a constant state of entropy.
Or crashing it all back down.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a very simple, short, unorganized explanation of the history of it.
Very well, or very good. You did it. You beat my record by...
notes too very easily.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it requires a lot of, like, explaining what things are.
Mm-hmm.
But to, like, wrap everything up into a neat little bow, basically what it is the world's broke, and a bunch of very powerful people just got out of a box. And that's kind of like the fancy way of putting it.
And when you play as an Exalted, there's a group of people that hate you.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Don't worry.
The Wild Hunt.
The Wild Hunt.
Like, the Dragon-Blooded, they basically think that they think Dragon-Blooded are super cool dudes who are all sweet and spiritually great, and all the other dirty Exalted, like the Bloody Lunars and the Damn Solars, are a bunch of heathen anathema who are demons who we all need to kill because they're evil.
Hey, you're an evil person. We're gonna kill you.
Yeah, and it really doesn't matter whether you're evil or not. They believe you're evil. Mm-hmm. So have fun with it.
Yeah, so it has a lot of themes of trying to convince people that you're there for their own, like that you're there for their good. You have their best interest in mind, whether or not you do. And it also has that recurring theme of the strong always being brought down by the weak, which raises the question of, were they strong to begin with? Did they deserve to own that empire they ruled? There's just a lot of just deeper themes involved in the game, and it's so big that I really recommend that anybody who wants to play in the world basically take what they want from it and leave the rest on the side. Don't try to jump into everything at once. Don't try to go everywhere at once. Just
because you'll drown.
Yeah, just pick a place and dabble in it for a while.
You can choose one place, let's say the West, and have like multiple campaigns that are completely different from each other.
Yeah, just in one direction. Like, focus. Like, the key thing to running a successful Exalted campaign is pick a place and focus.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are some, like, superhuman. You're not going to be able to process the entire setting at once. Mm-hmm. It's just too much.
And that's okay.
So,
and it's meant for replayability.
Oh, yeah. God, yes. And we'll get more in the next episode we're going to be doing. Is we're going to be focusing on all the stuff we really like, which means we're going to get to gush about certain setting and character elements that are really cool.
Oh yeah, I'm excited.
That's what, like, the next podcast you guys are going to is going to be really positive. Like, we're going to kind of put aside the stuff we disagree with, the stuff we don't like about the setting, and we're going to focus on the stuff we actually enjoy about Exalted, like why it's fun. Mm-hmm. That's what we're doing next.
Yeah, nice like begin with a positive note, and then delve into the more shady notes.
Yeah.
Oh man, what just what it is now as written?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a lot. Oh boy, let's see. I hate that they drew lines between the Exalt types and made very clear delineations between the good guys and the bad guys. I strongly dislike how they wrote the Dragon-Blooded, in that there's these people who are desperately trying to keep the world going, in a very literal sense, but they're just written as these villains because it's just easier to do. There's just so much lazy writing in Exalted that it didn't need to be there, and it would have actually been better if they just had not put it in. There's a lot of just kind of coddling the idea of playing a Solar, and really inferring the idea that, like, the world was stolen from you, and you're owed the Empire and the world, and you should definitely try to just reestablish Solar rule because the world needs you. You know, like there's this thing called the Great Contagion that happened, where it's written as if the Solars had been here, the Great Contagion would have never happened. But mechanically speaking, if the Solars had been there, it wouldn't have mattered, because it's a disease that spreads through every rock, spirit, ghost, elemental, blade of grass, bird, person. It just swept across the world and killed 9 out of 10 people. And the Solar Exalted medicine charms are cool, but they're not fast enough. They don't work fast enough to have like made a difference. But for some reason, everything's like, oh, like a lot of medicine charms that involve diseases that aren't solar charms will say, oh, this will cure anything except for the Great Contagion. But the Great Contagion's gone. It'll never come back. It's clearly written in there. The Great Contagion will never happen again. So it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And it happened like 700 years ago in the setting. So it doesn't matter. It's just there to make solar, or make people who are playing solars feel like, oh, well, obviously everybody made a mistake. Sure, it took like 3,000 years after we fell for the world to finally come into peril, but, you know, whatever. Ugh.
Encourages, rather than like actually struggling with characters and struggling with morality and ethics, it encourages a player just to like pick up the setting and beat it into his own shape.
Yeah.
And that can be fun if like you're doing a game where you want that, but you shouldn't have to just be an asshole when you play a solo.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to like, it kind of pushes, like it subtly pushes players towards having a really like betting, like normally players aren't intentionally that arrogant, but it's like the setting kind of like pushes players who are playing solars into just thinking they're the best at everything, because they are, like, according to the setting at least, they're actually the best at everything ever. Like they're just the best, and nothing anyone can ever do will ever change that. And it kind of like goes like, oh, okay,
just the way things are.
Yeah. Why are we playing other types of Exalted then if this is just Solars the game?
Mm-hmm. You must be this gold to play. Just a few weeks ago, we were talking about trying to set up an Exalted game, and I mentioned that I wanted to play a Dynast I wanted to play a member of the Dynasty, like a Dragon-Blooded, and somebody said, oh darn, I was really hoping to play a Solar, I guess I can pick a different thing. And I was like, no, you don't have to play something other than a Solar. We can make it work. We can just make the setting less stupid. It's okay.
Exalted really encourages you to do more homebrew to fit your game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It definitely does.
The Dragon-Blooded are always the fall guy.
They kind of are. Like, they're like they're the main. The thing is, the Dragon-Blooded are sort of the main. They're the sort of like other main characters of Exalted. Like, you should be seeing, like, Exalted should be one of those games that is kind of like dualistic, in that, like, from the Dragon-Blooded side, you see the other Exalt types as a bunch of psychopathic assholes who want to destroy everything because they think that because thousands of years ago their ancestors were kings, they deserve to be king. From the Solar side, the Abyssals should be... not Abyssals. The Dragon-Blooded should be a bunch of crazy people who keep thinking that just because you're a Solar, you want to force to be king. Like, it should be a case of, like, there should be like a dualistic thing where both sides hate each other and both sides like are antagonistic, but that doesn't mean that one side has to be right.
There isn't always like the good guy or the bad guy.
Like sometimes it's just two people that hate each other for reasons that that are just historical, and the setting wants there to be an established bad guy, and since Solars are the main characters, it's always Dragon-Blooded, and Dragon-Blooded are like depicted as almost comically incompetent to the point where like people stopped believing that Dragon-Blooded were actual Exalted. Like
players, people, not just in the game, but like you mentioned, like I want to be a rad terrestrial, and they're like, well, terrestrial shouldn't have that ability because that's comparable to a Solar, and we can't have that. Well, no, that's stupid. Don't do that. The Dragon-Blooded are supposed to be foot soldiers. No, they're tacticians, they're generals. You have a Solar who controls many armies, but then in those many armies, they're led by Dragon-Blooded, and Dragon-Blooded are amazing at leading mortals.
It's kind of their thing. Ironically, Dragon-Blooded are kind of like really good at leading mortals. Like Solars, I think this is something that's forgotten a lot. Solars are good at leading, like Solars are good at organizing and building like infrastructures of other Exalted, but they're actually less good, I'd say, than Dragon-Blooded at like bureaucracying mortals, like getting mortals to work together and to do things correctly and to like actually be effective. That's the Dragon-Blooded's thing. The Dragon-Blooded are the ones that were actually interacting with people the most, from what I can gather. They're the ones that were like actually leading the army. Like, the Solar was the one who was, like, the high commander who was, like, overarching the entire operation, but it was the Dragon-Blooded who the soldiers would hear in battle yelling at them what to do, because the Dragon-Blooded was the one that was actually there fighting. Like, it's sort of like a thing, like, they should be the cool guys who are great with people. And that's a completely different skill than just having great skills, because they were made literally to do that. They weren't made to be like the help. They like, this is a thing that and this is my opinion of Exalt. Want it to be where Solars are the main characters, and every other type of Exalt was the help of Solars. Like, Lunars were literally, like, according to what I've read from certain people, their view of Lunars is literally just being like the butlers of Solars, with like Terrestrial Exalted literally just being like hired henchmen. And that is a very, very bad way to view cool, badass proto-beings who are like,
who are especially playable.
Yeah, an army of Gilgamesh shouldn't be considered the help.
That's a good way of putting it.
Like, the army of Gilgamesh, that is literally like if you have Gilgamesh at the top leading an entire legion, and you have a bunch of characters from the best way to put it is, if any of you have ever watched Wushu,
No.
It's like the battle. It's like, the idea is individual Dragon-Blooded should be super cool and badass in their respective niche. Like, and of course, it does make sense. Like, I sort of do understand the idea that since Dragon-Blooded are so numerous, they're a bit weaker than a Solar in a pure sense, but like, physical and direct pure power isn't different from you. Like, it's different from utility. Like, you can have a character who's entirely effective because he's good at solving mysteries, and that you don't have to be a Solar to do that. You can be cool without being a Solar, and that's something that Exalted struggles with a bit.
Yeah.
Like, that's just what I've noticed reading it. Like, they just don't respect how cool their characters should be, which is weird. You would think they would hype up their own characters. Like, you would think that the writers would be like, oh yeah, dude, this is a Dragon-Blooded. He's super cool. You should be pumped to see him do things.
Yeah,
Like,
you should be excited to play this character.
yeah, like, he's super cool. Like, you should be excited to watch it. But no, like, instead, the writer has the Dragon-Blooded Exalt as a Solar.
Yeah.
Which is...
Like,
okay.
oh, I'm a member of the
Like,
Dynasty, but I'm a Solar now.
Dragon-Blooded multicolored mortals now.
So this has been the Podcast Cast. I'm Ark.
I am Jarrett.
I'm Insuling.
Signing off. Thanks for watching.